Hello to everyone. Today I will give information about the World Alliance on Digitalization for Disaster and Emergency Management, in short, WADDEM. The content of the talk will be like this. First, we will talk about disaster types and disaster management systems in general. Then I will give information about the Alliance, activities, and finally, I will give conclusions. Disaster types and disaster management systems. Well, disasters can be caused by several reasons. They can be purely natural disasters, technological disasters like explosion of factories, or human-caused disasters, for example, terrorist attacks. And in natural disasters, also there are many types of or different kinds of disasters, from earthquakes till to tsunami, and of course they are all somehow different from each other. In the literature, when you look at disaster management, the most publications talk about the phases of disaster management. First, you may consider pre-disaster phase before a disaster occurs, and then in general, two kinds of activities: prediction of the possible disasters and preparation for the disasters. And when a disaster occurs, then you may follow a certain process. Most of the time, these activities are carried out by experts or by the operators. First, they want to identify what has happened, assess the situation, try to understand it in more detail so that they can cope with it. And while doing so, they may apply different strategies. And of course, they carry out recovery procedures. Another model is this model, what is called the disaster management life cycle. Here we see that disaster management is divided into three phases: before event, during event, after event. And it is a cycle. Before event or just after an event, you try to actually mainly carry out risk reduction activities, and it can be a prevention and also preparation. And when a disaster happens, you want to respond. It is during the event, and after the event, you want to carry out relief and recovery operations. And you want to prepare yourself for the, of course, next possible disaster. Well, kind of disasters largely determine the actions to be taken. In general, actions to be taken depend on the disaster type or kind. For example, tsunami is quite different from earthquakes, or wildfires are different. So every disaster type may require different preparation, different, of course, prevention, and different kind of response. In the literature, most risk reduction techniques focus on the before event phase. Response operations are also called rescue or intervention operations. When we look at the disaster response techniques of today, the state of the art, all kinds of devices are used to gather information about a disaster. Like, for example, you may have drones, you may have different kinds of ground-based data sources. You may place sensors in different locations, security cameras, of course. And there may be teams reporting on site, and you may receive different kinds of responses. And all these information are gathered and collected in a database. It can be also a cloud. And in the operation room, they are displayed to the operators or the experts. Experts inspect and look at the situation, and they can give commands and orders to the task forces. And of course, the logistics centers are also important. Task forces can be, of course, quite different depending also on the disaster type. It can be a rescue team, firefighter teams, security forces, repair teams, and of course, you need most of the time medical care. So in such a system, of course, different kind of technologies are used. Also, different kind of software technologies are adapted. When you look at the situation awareness and deduction phase, of course, the drones and sensors, security cameras, IoT networks, big data, clouds, databases, all kind of data analytics operations are required, and visualization techniques, and of course, communication techniques, possibly also between the teams, and of course, logistics software is important. And what is wrong or what is missing in today's disaster management systems? Well, here is a list. First of all, there is lack of end-to-end traceability and process support for command and control. Secondly, weak or absence of automated demand generation and optimal allocation of resources. In case of a big disaster, of course, it can be a very chaotic situation. It can be a very difficult process to determine, okay, what kind of demands are and what kinds of demands are there, what kind of resources are needed. And allocation of resources to the demands can be quite difficult. It is very hard to carry out these operations manually. Therefore, we need an automated support. Also, traceability and end-to-end process for command and control can be a very challenging task. In order to optimize the whole process, we need to have performance indicators. You have to define them and you have to measure them continuously. Accordingly, you have to optimize the aid operations online. Finally, we think that there must be a digital ecosystem platform to support all these actions. I will describe these problems and also, of course, propose solutions for these. WADDEM claims that disaster management is a resource management problem, and digitalization is needed to its fullest extent. Let's talk about the alliance now. Well, WADDEM will cover disasters caused by all types of hazards, including natural, technological, and human. The objectives as defined by WADDEM are identified by intensive field study and problem analysis. What does it mean? We interviewed people, we talked to them, to experts, people who are really working on the field, and try to understand actually what is missing. Based on that, we prepared a requirements document identified by questionnaire, and the document is written from 4 different perspectives: disaster management viewpoint, system architecture viewpoint, software design viewpoint, and quality viewpoint. When we interviewed the people, the authorities, they said we want all these requirements. Then we prioritize these requirements And also, we had a report on the synthesis, meaning that what kind of technologies and skills are necessary to design systems in fulfilling the requirements. So these studies actually gave a very solid background to understand what is missing in the current systems. The alliance distinguished itself in the following ways. A, process automation for command and control. B, digital ecosystem platform. C, the ADOPS principle. D, the role of social capital in disaster preparedness and intervention. E, disaster and emergency resilient economies and industries. I will explain these one by one in the following slides. We consider all these together as a package, digitalization techniques applied to these, a new paradigm in disaster and emergency management. Process automation for command and control. The Alliance focuses on novel techniques in automating disaster and emergency management processes and traceability for command and control in the broadest sense. What does it mean? It means tracing and command and control are applied for every disaster instance, for each victim is tracked and traced, each rescue operation, and so forth. So here we see that information gathering about the disaster storage, displaying, and giving commands, and all these are traced from begin to end for the purpose of command and control. Secondly, we are interested in designing a digital ecosystem platform. What does it mean? When you look at most applications, people talk about dedicated specific applications for a practical case. What we want to do is, however, a different approach, a digital ecosystem engineering approach, meaning that instead of targeting disaster-specific applications, research and development activities are first carried out in the specification and implementation of a digital ecosystem platform where the disaster-specific automation processes can be installed on the platform as applications when needed. Here we see actually a typical digital ecosystem platform and its application. We assume that companies should be developing applications, and there is a platform owner. Here, as is depicted, WADDEM is the platform owner, let's assume, and applications are installed in an app store. This requires, of course, that applications fulfill the requirements to be installed. And users of the disaster and emergency management system, they activate these applications for their purpose. And the system is, of course, running on these applications for the purposes which I listed in the previous slide. What is then the ADOPS principle? ADOPS principle consists of 6 items. They are complementary: awareness, demand generation, optimization, performance, tracking, and simulation. Let's see them one by one. Awareness is important. So assume that we can, of course, have different kind of disasters as well, but assume that a disaster occurs like an earthquake, and based on all kind of techniques, especially sensor fusion techniques, and adopting different kind of sensors. What we try to do, as an example, we try to actually find out what has happened. Here, for example, a table. The first column is unique identifiers of the disaster instances. We give them unique number and we categorize them: collapse, fire, or let's say landslide. We try to also measure the intensity of the disaster instance and its effect on a building or a network and a number of persons involved. This is awareness, and it's quite important. And these awareness detection is based on 4 objectives. The first one is detect the damage with highest precision. Secondly, detect the locations of human beings and living creatures with highest precision. Accomplish the goals with the lowest possible cost. Accomplish the goals in the least possible time. Of course, these objectives may conflict with each other, so you want to find a balance. Demand lists are automatically inferred for the necessary resources so that aid operations can be executed efficiently, effectively. So what does it mean? Again, we will give an example. This table was presented in the previous slide. And based on this table, we give this table to demand generation system, and demand generation system generates these, resources. For example, the disaster instance 9 requires a firefighter team, 2 medical teams, 4 repair teams, 3 rescue teams, and 3 teams of security forces. We will now talk about the optimization phase. In this phase, the available resources are optimally assigned to the inferred demands on time. In case of insufficient resources, prioritization, trade-off, or dynamic selection techniques are applied. Here is an example. This table was shown in the previous slide, and assume that these are our task forces or resources. And we assume a scheduler and an optimizer software, and these information are fed into this system. And this system actually allocates the required resources to the demands. Here there is, for example, a scattered plot based on a simulation, and these dots show the end time of the scheduled tasks from the inferred task for the emergency instances. So each one corresponds to a particular emergency instance and time. So this is the time axis, and this is the priority axis. So this is computed, and the computer can consider all facts and try to find out an optimal solution. As we can see, in such a large disaster, this is very difficult to realize manually. So we need to define the performance indicators of operations. They have to be defined formally so that they can be installed in software, they can be measured and computed. Accordingly, ongoing operations can be monitored online, and in case of deviations from the desired performance values, corrective control actions can be carried out. Here is a disaster instance, and then all kinds of task forces, and the logistics center is there. So what we want to measure is measure the performance of the actions of the task forces. So for that reason, we need to monitor, and we have to calculate the performance. So therefore, we need to define the formulas that are necessary to calculate the performance values. Here we see a symbolic representation of a disaster instance. For example, an earthquake. Different task forces are on their way. We want to track these and, of course, evaluate whether they are online, on time, en route. So it includes monitoring, evaluation of the situation, and taking control actions if necessary. It may also involve communication among the teams and team members. So monitoring and tracking and taking control actions if necessary. Simulation. It's an important phase. It's an important aspect. What we do here is to simulate the possible disaster scenarios and connect that simulator to the disaster management system. Why do we do that? First of all, to determine the effect of a large set of prospective disaster scenarios. Determine the effectiveness and efficiency of the disaster and emergency ecosystem platform. Evaluate the necessary quantity of resources and to optimize the location of logistics centers. Simulation environments and techniques must be researched, designed, and implemented so that the whole system, for example, starting from the demand generation system, is connected to the simulator. Of course, in the actual phase, they are connected to the awareness part of the system, and the real disaster data is gathered. But of course, it's not always possible. We need to generate all kinds of disaster scenarios through simulation. Even in times when no disasters are experienced, triggered by the simulated disaster scenarios, the ecosystem platform must be continuously operational so that it can be optimized using online machine learning techniques. We also carry out research on the issues related to so-called social capital. The role of social capital in disaster preparedness and intervention is also a research topic. So what is social capital? Social capital can be defined as the value of the relationships between people who work or live together and the knowledge and skills that they have and share. This is the definition of social capital as we refer to. The research activities on this topic investigate the role of social capital in disaster preparedness and intervention, and from three different perspectives. The role of richer social capital in disaster preparedness and intervention, coordinate the responsibilities and authorities of governmental and social capital roles in meaningful disaster management scenarios, because we have on one hand authorities, governmental roles, and people. We would like to actually coordinate the responsibilities. And finally, the methodological policies to increase wealth in social capital from the perspective of disaster management. We also do research on economics for disaster prevention and preparedness. What does it mean? These research activities have also three important goals. With the use of digitalization techniques, create an economical and industrial infrastructure which can, A, withstand major disasters and emergency conditions, B, reorganize and optimize the capabilities in creating new resources and products in minimizing the negative effects, and C, guiding policymakers and practitioners to make smart investments that can strengthen disaster resilience. Well, what kind of activities we carry out in WADDEM? Well, first kind of activities can be seen as problem analysis, research, and cooperation. First of all, of course, we have to have mission-oriented, problem-oriented activities. To do that, we start from the human-centered disaster scenarios. We formulate the areas where the current disaster and emergency management system fall short of the needs. Secondly, we elaborate on the disaster, especially digital solution domains, and define the areas of technological research in harmony with psychological, sociological, economical, and industrial considerations. Coordinate with the governmental agencies and work out strategies in bringing the importance of digitalization of disaster and emergency management issues high on the political agenda. Carry out lobbying activities in creating national and international granting programs. Initiate, support, and collaborate with the research and education activities. To this aim, create opportunities for mutual visits and joint research activities among the members of the alliance. The second kind of activities are related to dissemination. We want to organize workshops, conferences, special issues in journals, publish and disseminate to generate knowledge as manifesto, standards, ecosystem infrastructures, and research contributions in the relevant public media, and define professional certification criteria based on offered training plans and accredit evaluation bodies in various roles, for example, aid personnel, decision makers, managers, technologists, and entrepreneurs. Another aspect, a very important aspect, is the standardization activities. We want to support national and international standardization activities. For example, disaster and emergency data that can be used in improving situation awareness and data fusion must be conveniently possible. But it's not only disaster data to be standardized. Most people talk about only that aspect. We need to standardize many aspects of disaster management. Otherwise, we cannot integrate our efforts. For example, simulation. The required disaster management cases and scenarios within special dimensions must be reused, extended, and shared. Simulation is a very effort-taking process, and we have to share our efforts in that. But if we don't standardize, we cannot use them together. We need to build also system architectures, and these are most of the time systems of systems infrastructures. We need to create cooperation among distributed computing nodes, and they should be facilitated for the common goal, and therefore we need standardization. If we build a digital ecosystem platform, we need to also define the application stores and standardize the procedures and the way how companies should develop applications for these application stores. Applications developed by different parties then can utilize the disaster and emergency management platform effectively. We also need to define the models of disaster and emergencies, GIS elements, events, digital twins, demands, and resources, because we are automating demand generation, resource allocation, and so forth. We need to therefore standardize also the models. We have to define performance models, and we have to standardize them as well, so that independent developed systems can be optimized for the common performance goals. Otherwise, we cannot. Of course, for command and control, we want to track and coordinate, and therefore models for tracking and coordination, they have to be standardized as well. So independently develop and manage aid operations can be tracked and accordingly integrated. Now we will conclude the presentation. WADDEM will cover disaster caused by all types of hazards, including natural, technological, and human. This is what we have already said. WADDEM provides a conceptual paradigm shift in disaster and emergency management by process automation, digital ecosystem platform, the ADOPS principle, the research activities on the role of social capital in disaster preparedness and intervention, and economics for disaster prevention and preparedness. WADDEM is complementary to current research activities on disaster risk reduction and management. Disaster and emergency management systems are long-living systems which require continuous investment, research, and development activities. Here we see the website of the WADDEM Alliance. It is simply waddem.com. This is the homepage, and you can see the news page. Here we list all kind of news that may come along. And in the About page, we defined our who we are and what we do, as I presented in this talk. Research topics are listed here, so it's quite intensive. And we may add new research topics to this page. As you can see, the research topics and the detailed descriptions of research, the research topics are here. So when you click read more, you see all the detailed items. And then you may look at them. And if you are interested in these research activities, of course, you may always contact us. For example, this is demand generation and so forth. Further publications are listed in the publications page. The projects we have already, we are running at this moment. And here is the list of participants. Of course, these are all very dynamic pages. We add new information from time to time. And if you want to contact us, you can simply fill this form and send it to us, and we will respond as soon as possible. I thank you for your time.